Hello, everyone. Hey, what's up, Kuma? Hey, Katie, how you doing? What's up, Patrick? Hey, Dee Dee, glad you could come. What's up, Bigfoot? Hey, Streety, you ready for some awesome battles? I think we're gonna have some awesome battles today. This chapter, yeah. How are you guys doing? Man, I've been slacking. I've been missing my uploads. I didn't do a video upload last Saturday and also yesterday. I didn't. Yeah. But I released a video today, so I'm very happy about that. What's up, Nikki? Glad you could join. All right. What's up, Hope? Yes, you are just in time. Don't update your Samsung phone? Wait, I think I just did. When was the update? Was it recent? I think I just did. It's fine. It seems fine to me. Hey, David. How's it going? What's up, Blue Log? Why is your name Blue Log? Oh, you guys. Did you guys know that Google can do this? Okay. Let me show you something cool in Google Translate, okay? Hold up. What's up, Sean? What's up, Natalie? How's it going? All right. Here's Google Translate. Did you know? So you know that they can translate, you can translate Vietnamese to English, right? But did you know that you can make Google speak in a different accent? So let me explain. So here's Vietnamese, right? Oh shit. Ah. If I type, hi, how are you? Listen to what it says.
Hi, how are you? Hi, how are you doing today?
I don't know if that's offensive or if it's just really funny. It can do a Vietnamese accent. Like a thick Vietnamese accent on an English sentence. All right, let's change to Japanese. Okay, let's see what it says.
Hi, I am doing fine. How are you?
Why did they put in this feature? I don't understand. Yes. That is so weird. Who asked for this feature? My vid today was very cool. Thank you so much, Nitro. You were expecting I would want to skip the stream? No. Yeah, that was a long video. So I had to skip last Saturday. And then we had some issues in the back, like on the back end, so I couldn't upload yesterday either. So luckily I uploaded today. I wonder if you can make Google speak in a Cajun accent. How do I do that? Like Louisiana? I don't think there's a Louisiana country. Nope. All right, what else can we do? But that's not all, guys. That's not all. Here's what you can do. Hold on. You can make it. Let's do French. Okay, let's do. So you can take French, and I can put it here. And I can make it speak French in a Japanese accent. Oh, wait. Oh, no, wait.
サルートジェバイスビンコメントバスチュ。
Yeah, I'm sure that's totally wrong. Let's try Vietnamese. This is Vietnamese speaking French.
Salute sơ về biên comment bus tu.
It's funny because I know Vietnamese people who talk like this. This accent is very familiar to me. Yeah, this is how my parents speak. It's a good feature if people are curious about how different accents sound, I guess. All right, yeah. What else can we do? What else can we do? How about Russian? All right. Let's do Russian, speaking French.
Salute J-Wise bien comment was tu.
Oh, that's really bad. Like to see the inside of my van. All right.
Hi, would you like to see the inside of my van?
That doesn't sound that Russian, no? No, I don't like that. Too Japanese. This is the last time, hold on.
Hi, would you like to see the inside of my van?
When you put it that way, it doesn't sound that scary. All right, this is Vietnamese.
He would you like to see the inside of my van?
What's up? Cajuns are extremely varied in the way they speak. How do you speak in a Cajun accent? What language would sound really scary? I thought Russian would sound scary, but Russian didn't sound that good, actually. What's a nice, like a scary accent? Is this offensive? I hope this is not offensive. German?
Hi, would you like to see the inside of my van?
That's fine. Anyways, yeah, so that's the Vietnamese to English. Oh, that's the Google Translate. Go around and play with it. It's pretty cool. I just found out it can do that. It doesn't sound scary because it's a woman's voice. Try Danish? Okay, Danish. That's a good idea. What should I say? This Danish tastes really good.
This Danish tastes really good.
Sounds accurate to me. Can we do French?
C'est un noir vraiment bon goût.
Chinese? Okay. Last time, last time, guys. Last time.
This Danish tastes really good.
That's not that good. I like the Vietnamese one. Vietnamese sounds very much like a Vietnamese accent to me.
This Danish tastes really good.
Anyways, all right. There you go. Play around with that. It's really fun. All right, before we get started, I have this. It's like, yeah, it's like raw ramen. If you guys have ever eaten raw ramen before. There you go. Hmm. Hmm. It's exactly like raw ramen. It's really good. You wanted to ask, what does acolytes first, mountain gods second mean? I think you know what that means. Yeah, it was a joke that they used to say back in the day, back in the medieval Japanese days. Yeah, because these mountain monks, they really liked their boys. I don't know how else to say it. Is it spicy? No, it's not. It's very good. It tastes a lot like raw ramen. Yeah, I always ate raw ramen as a kid. My mom would hate it. Would hate it. She'd be like, "You can't eat that, okay? It's gonna cause you to have stomach aches and stuff." And yeah, she was totally lying. It doesn't cause stomach aches. It just tastes really good. Yeah, just eat it right out of the packet. It depends on which ramen you have. Some ramen you can't eat raw because it doesn't taste that good, but other ramen tastes really good raw, okay? It also depends on the spice packet that you have, like the flavoring packets. Some flavoring packets taste really good raw, okay? So what I used to do is just open up the ramen packet, take out the spice packet and open it up, put it in, and then just shake it, right? Just break it up and shake it. Really get that mix in there, and then just eat it raw like that. It's really good. You should try that next time. Raw ramen is very popular in prison. Okay, well, I didn't know that. It's also popular among Asian kids. No, I cannot speak Japanese. You can tell by the way I pronounce words in my videos. Yeah, it has to be the deep fried ramen. Oh, let's try one last time. You know, some accents are really sexy, right? I prefer the Australian accent myself, but oh yeah, let me show you. Okay, so you can do English, right? But you can change it. Wait, hold on. I thought you can change what kind of English, like. Oh, maybe not. I thought you could change what kind of English accent it is, like if it's Australian or British. Uh, oh well. Never mind. Okay. Let's get started, okay? So, what happened last chapter? All right, last week. So, last week, the 5 sword schools have merged into one unified school, right? So, Zhuo Langchan, um, like Zhuo Langchan succeeded in his plan to merge the 5 schools. So now they're merged, and the Peach Valley 6 fairies are running around, like they're running their mouths on who should be the leader of this new school, right? And Yu Jizu, this is the guy who just usurped the leadership of the Taishan school. He got mad he gets mad and he attacks them, right? Now you can see that people still sided, even though the schools have merged, people still sided with their own schools, right? Because it's like you can't just declare a school merged and then expect all of the old loyalties and grievances to go away, right? People still are siding with the schools that they were originally from. So Yujizu attacks the six fairies. They but then they pull him up and they're about to rip him into 4 pieces, right? The way they always do. Zhu Langchan jumps in. He cuts 2 legs and 1 arm of Yujizu, making him an invalid, right? But in doing that, he also saved his life. But it looks really cruel to people watching. And then the 6 fairies, they start blaming Zhu Langchan for being so cruel and stuff. So the 6 fairies are being really smart and really coherent when they speak. Ling Hu Chong, our hero, Ling Hu Chong, he's a little bit suspicious. He's like, why are they being so smart? And he sees Ying Ying in the crowd, feeding lines to the 6 fairies, and then he realized that okay, it wasn't them talking, it was actually Ying Ying feeding them lines. That's why they're so smart and so coherent. So after all this stuff happens, after all this talking, they finally decide to go fight for the leadership position. Okay, arguing wouldn't solve anything, but fighting solves everything. So they decide to fight for the leadership position, and that's where we ended. Yeah, it's a recap. How's that? It's 2 arms and 1 leg. Oh, did I say 2 legs and 1 arm? Yeah, that's what I meant. So he only has 1 leg left. The guy is the Black Knight from Monty Python. Yeah, there you go. I love that scene. All right, let's get started. Sword Fight Part 2. Okay, so this Yu Qingzi guy and Yu Yinzi, these are the 2 brothers from the Taishan schools. From the Taishan school, they are fighting with each other because both of them want to be the leader of that school, right? They want to be in the leadership position. The long sword in Yu Qingzi's hand kept trembling, but he didn't put it up. Even though he was older, he was always drowning himself in wine, and his sword art wasn't as good as Yu Yinzi. Even after the 5 mountain sword schools merged, it would be inevitable that each of the 5 schools would still be separated physically on 5 mountains. Thus, each mountain would have a leader. Yu Qingzi and Yu Yinzi knew their skills were far below Zhuo Langchan, so they had no plan to become the 5 mountain schools' headmaster, but they were thinking of who would become the leader once they got back to their mountain. At this time, the crowd was very excited, waiting for the brothers to clash weapons. Yu Qingzi did not dare to fight rashly, but he really resented Yu Yinzi for shaming him in front of the realm's heroes. Moreover, Zhuo Langchan was likely to install Yu Yinzi as the leader on Taishan, so he would be bound to follow Yu Yinzi's order from now on, and he would never be able to hold his head high again. For the moment, the 2 brothers were staring angrily at each other. Neither of them wanted to back down. Suddenly, someone in the crowd with a sharp voice said, "I see the 2 of you haven't even grasped the slightest bit of Taishan School's martial arts essence. You really have thick faces to be quarreling right here and wasting everyone's time." Everyone turned to have a look at the person who said this. They saw a tall, handsome youth with a beautiful appearance, whose face was pale and whose mouth turned up at the corner. carrying a cold, mocking smile. He was Lin Pingzhi of the Huashan school. Someone recognized him and called out, "He's Mr. Yue's new son-in-law." Okay. So yay, we see Lin Pingzhi again. Ling Hucheng thought, "Martial brother Lin has always been very cautious and doesn't speak much. After not seeing him for just a while, I'm surprised he now actually dared to ridicule these two traitors in front of everyone here." Yu Qingzi, Yu Yinzi, and Yu Jizi were in cahoots in harming priest Tianmen to get on Zuo Langchan's good side. So Ling Hucheng already felt resentful towards these two priests. When Ling Pingzhi insulted them, he felt quite happy. Yu Yinzi said, "If you say I haven't grasped the slightest bit of Taishan School's martial art, does that mean you've grasped it all? Then please, use Taishan School's martial art and let our eyes be opened." He said the words Taishan Schools especially loudly. His meaning was, you're a Huashan School disciple, but even if you have strong martial art, it would still be Huashan Schools, and you couldn't possibly use my Taishan martial art. Lin Pingzhi gave a cold sneer and said, "Taishan School's martial art is deep and profound. How can traitors like you, who harmed your own school member, be able to understand?" "Pinger!" Yue Buchun shouted. "Priest Yu Yinzi is still your elder. Don't be rude." "Yes," Lin Pingzhi responded. Yu Yinzi indignantly said, "Mr. Yue, what a good disciple and son-in-law you have. He can even speak nonsense about Taishan School's martial art." Suddenly, a female voice said, "How do you know for sure he was speaking nonsense?" A good-looking young woman stepped out. Her skirt was brushing the ground, her belts were floating in the wind, and a red flower was inserted into her hair. It was Yue Lingshan. She was carrying a longsword on her back, and her raised right hand held a sword handle. She said, "I'll use Taishan School's sword art and ask for your advice." Yu Yinzi knew that she was Yue Buchun's daughter. He was thinking that since Yue Buchun had approved the merger of the 5 schools earlier, at the moment Zuo Langchan would be on friendly terms with him, so he didn't dare to offend her. He smiled slightly and said, "Congratulations, Miss Yue. Are you angry because I didn't come to your wedding and drank your celebratory wine? I admired your noble school's wonderful martial art. But this is the first time I've heard of Huashan School disciples being able to use Taishan School's sword art." What's up, loser and friends? Hey, New England? Yeah, I'm from California. What's up? When these words were said, it created a sensation through the crowd. A person queried, "Mr. Yue wants to become the 5 Mountain School's headmaster?" Another person shouted, "Mr. Yue also knows how to use Taishan, Hengshan, Songshan, and Hengshan School's martial arts?" Yue Buchun said in a clear voice, "My daughter talks irresponsibly. Don't worry about what my little kid said." But Yue Lingshan continued, "Martial Uncle Zuo, if you can use Taishan, Hengshan, Huashan, and Hengshan schools' sword arts to defeat the masters of each school, then we'll naturally submit and accept you as the 5 Mountain Schools' headmaster. Otherwise, although your Songshan School's sword art is very formidable in the world, it's still only the Songshan School sword art, which is good and has nothing to do with the other 4 schools at all." The crowd all thought these words were right. If someone was proficient with the sword arts of each school, then he should become the 5 Mountain Schools' headmaster, and this would be very fitting. But each school's sword arts had undergone countless refinements for hundreds of years by many masters. Even if someone was taught by a master of each school and had undergone dozens of years of practice, he might not necessarily be able to fully learn all of the sword arts from the 5 schools, let alone the secret skills of each school that wasn't usually passed down to ordinary disciples. The possibility of someone actually grasping the essence of all the sword arts from all 5 schools at the same time was quite remote. But Zhuo Langchan thought, why didn't Yue Buchun's daughter say this? Wait, why did Yue Buchun's daughter say this? She must have an intention for saying this. Has Yue Buchun become muddled? Does he really want to fight me for the 5 mountain schools' leadership? Yu Yinzi said, so, Mr. Yue is already proficient in the 5 schools' sword arts. This has never happened in the history of the 5 mountain sword schools before. I'd like to ask for Miss Yue's advice on the Taishan school's swordsmanship. Very well, Yue Lingshan shouted. With a shua sound, she drew the longsword she was carrying at her back. Yu Yinzi was livid. I'll compete with your father. A little girl like you dare to draw your sword against me? He reasoned that Yue Buchun would surely stop this. In his heart, he believed that the Yue couple was the only 2 people in the Huashan school who would be able to fight him. How would he know? Yue Buchun would only shake his head, sigh, and say, my little kid doesn't know how high the heaven is. Senior Yu Yin and Yu Qing are Taishan School's #1 masters, and you actually want to use Taishan School's sword art to fight against them? Isn't that asking for trouble? Yu Yinzi was startled. He thought, Herr Buchun told his daughter to use Taishan School's sword art to fight against me. He took a glance and saw that Yue Lingshan's longsword was in her right hand, and it was pointing down at an angle. Her left palm was wide open, and she started counting with her fingers. At the count of 5, her left hand made a fist. Then she again extended her thumb out, her forefinger, and counted to 5. Her 5 fingers were now spread open. She followed this by counting again, starting from her thumb. This time, as her middle finger folded, Yu Yinzi was greatly alarmed. How could this baby know the move Daizong Wei? Okay, so this is weird, right? It kind of looks like Yue Lingshan knows Taishan School sword art, which we're not sure why yet. And she's confident enough to challenge this Yu Yinzi guy, which is he's like an elite master in the Taishan School, right? More than 30 years ago, Yu Yinzi had heard from his master the essence of the move Daizhong Wei. This sword art move was regarded as Taishan School's highest and most profound skill. Its essence wasn't at the sword moves on the right hand, but it was at the counting with the left hand. The left hand would be continuously counting. It would be counting the enemy's position, the enemy's martial art, his height, dimensions of his weapon, as well as the height of the sun and many other things. The calculations were very complicated, and once the calculations were finished, the sword would immediately attack, and it would hit its target. In the past, Yu Yinzi had thought of this sword move. In the past, Yu Yinzi had thought of this sword move and felt he didn't have the ability to memorize and count all sorts of numbers in such a short time during a fight. So he didn't learn this skill deeply and only heard of its existence and put it at the back of his mind. His master was also actually not proficient at this technique. He only said, this Daizhong Wei technique is very difficult to learn and doesn't seem practical at all, but its power is unmatched. Since you don't have the desire to learn it, you won't be able to learn this sword move. But it doesn't matter. All of your martial brothers aren't as attentive as you, so they also wouldn't be able to learn this move. It's a pity this profound sword art, with no match in this world, will be lost to us from now on. When his master didn't force him to learn this sword art, Yu Yinzi felt relieved. Later on, he had never seen anyone in Taishan School practice this move ever again. Therefore, it was to his surprise that dozens of years later, he would see Yue Lingshan, who was only a young woman, use this move. All of a sudden, sweat started to form on his forehead. He had never heard his master talk about countering this move. He believed that since he couldn't practice it, other people wouldn't be able to practice this wonderful sword art either. So he never thought of a way to counter this sword move himself. But now the strangest thing had happened, and it was completely outside of his expectations. He was feeling really worried and pondered to himself, if I rapidly change my positions, leap high and crouch low, she naturally would block me. He immediately shook his longsword and slid 3 steps to the right, using the move Clear Moon on a cloudless sky. He then turned around, lowered his body, and slantingly pierced his longsword. His sword was still 5 feet away from Yue Lingshan's right shoulder when he turned another circle and followed with the move High Mountain Sky with a fast stab forward and fast pullback of the sword. But Yue Lingshan just stood her ground, unmoving. The long sword in her right hand constantly trembled, while the fingers on her left hand unceasingly counted. Yu Yinzi launched his sword with his body following it. He turned to the left side and then the right side, and with each turn he became even faster. This pattern of sword art was called Taishan 18 Coils. It was created by someone in the Taishan school a long time ago. That person observed that Taishan school's 18 coils of the 3 gates were very complicated. It was really an arduous path with its 5 steps of revolution and 10 steps of circles. As a result, he harmonized the sword art with the lay of the land, and it was now just as wonderful and strange as the 8 diagram palm movement. Taishan's 18 coils attacked higher with each coil and became more dangerous with each step. So I guess he's like circling her 18 times, maybe? 18 coils? These patterns of sword moves also become more violent with each turn. All of Yu Yinzu's attack seemed to have pierced through Yue Lingshan's body, but actually none of his attacks was a genuine killing move. Both of his eyes were fixated on Yue Lingshan's ceaselessly counting left hand. In the years past, his master once said, "This move, Daizhong Wei, can be said to be the ancestor of our Taishan school's sword art. It never misses and will never need a second stroke to kill someone. When a sword art reaches this stage, it has surpassed everything and has become godly. Your master actually only knows some basic skills of this skill, and if I actually wanted to learn it, then it might be easier said than done." When he thought of his master's words, cold sweat seeped through his back. That Taishan 18 coils was divided into slow 18, fast 18. The 18 coils turned slowly, and the other 18 coils turned quickly. Each step was higher than the next, and it was said the person at the back will only see the soles of the shoes of the person in front, while the person at the front will only see the hair of the person at the back. This pattern of sword art of the Taishan school was created from steep mountain paths going up Mount Taishan. The movements were suddenly slow and suddenly fast, punctuated by very complicated turnings. You're not a true martial artist until you fight your enemy while doing calculus at the same time. I don't get this move, right? So she has to finish counting, like all of her doing all of this math in her head. But while she's doing that, can she defend herself? Can't someone just attack her while she's counting? And then just interrupt the counting? I mean, yeah. Maybe this guy should just attack. Ling Hucheng saw Yue Lingshan not blocking or dodging, while the fingers on her left hand kept on stretching and folding as if she was counting something. He couldn't help feeling worried and wanted to shout out, "Little Martial sister, be careful!" But these 5 words were stuck in his throat, and he couldn't call out. Yu Yinzi was about to finish his sword pattern. But from the start, he didn't dare to actually attack Yue Lingshan, and his longsword was always 2 feet away from her body. Yue Lingshan abruptly stabbed her sword out and executed 5 moves. Each sword move had an ancient meaning behind it. 5 gigantic swords! The words escaped Yu Jingzi's mouth. Mount Taishan had some very ancient pines. According to an old story, they were given the names 5 gigantic pines during the Qin period, when their branches were sticking out and their green leaves covered one another. The martial uncle of Yu Qingzi and Yu Yinzi made a set of sword arts and called it the 5 gigantic swords. The moves in this set of sword art looked plain, but contained wonderful variations. More than 20 years ago, Yu Qingzi had studied this set of sword arts deeply, and when he saw Yue Lingshan's execution of these 5 moves, the moves looked right and wrong at the same time. Yue Lingshan's moves were different from the ones he had studied, but were of a higher level compared to the ones he knew. As he stood greatly astonished, Yue Lingshan suddenly bent her waist and thrust her sword towards him. She called out, "Is this your Taishan school's sword art?" Yu Qingzi hastily lifted his sword to block and called out, "Crane coming to a clear fountain. It's our Taishan sword art, but..." Even though the sword was already withdrawn, he was still startled, and his whole body broke into a cold sweat. When the enemy's sword came just then, the position was different from the one he had studied. That sword was dangerously close to piercing his chest. Yue Lingshan said, "Doesn't matter. It's Taishan's sword art." With a shua sound, she slashed her sword towards Yu Yinzi. Yu Qingzi said, "Stone block! Horse returning! You're using it wrong." Yue Lingshan said, "You remember the sword move's name." She swung her longsword and slashed it twice. Yu Yinzi cried out loudly, and almost at the same instant, Yu Jingzi's right knee was also stabbed. Yu Jingzi staggered for a bit before his right leg folded underneath him, and he dropped to his knee. He quickly drove his sword down powerfully to support himself, but the points of his sword just happened to hit a piece of rock, and it was broken into 2 pieces. But he was mumbling to himself, "3 happiness, but..." Yue Lingshan laughed icily and put her sword back into the sheath at her back. The spectators promptly burst into cheers. Such a pretty young lady unexpectedly used Taishan School sword art to defeat 2 of Taishan School's masters in such a short time. Her sword art was wonderful, and the people who saw the sword art display felt themselves soothed. The applause they gave her reverberated throughout the valley. Good idea. Good idea. You can counter that move by shouting random numbers. Yep, that always gets me when doing math. When someone shouts numbers, I can't do math. That's a good plan. Zhu Lengchan and the other Songshan School masters looked at each other, and all of them were hesitating. They all thought, this little girl can actually use Taishan's sword art, but there's some big alterations, and her sword moves are very violent. This little girl can't possibly be the one who thought of them. It must be Yue Buchun who imparted them to her. To actually finish learning all these sword moves probably took many, many days. If Yue Buchun has deliberately planned all these, then his will is in no way small. Yu Yinzi suddenly called out, Hugh, this isn't Daizong Wei. After he was injured, he suddenly realized Yue Lingshan wasn't displaying the moves from Daizong Wei. Actually, it could be said that she could take victory in just one move if she used that move, but he didn't understand why she still had to use 5 gigantic sword, crane coming to a clear fountain, stone block, horse returning, 3 happiness sword moves. What was more exasperating was that she actually added some modifications to the key aspects of the Taishan School sword moves she used. His martial brother and he hurriedly thought of this, but they didn't have much time, so they automatically used the counter sword moves they had been practicing for dozens of years already. But her sword positioning differed greatly, and the two brothers were inadvertently defeated. If she had actually used another school's sword art, no matter what move it was or how wonderful, they would not have lost to this young woman. But she was really using the real sword arts of Taishan school, so they felt shame, anger, and surprise mixed together, and couldn't accept that they had lost to her. Ling Huchong was bewildered when he saw Yue Lingshan using those sword moves to defeat her opponents. He suddenly heard someone behind him whisper, "Master Ling Hu, did you teach her those moves?" Oh wait, this is Qiang Boguang. "Master Ling Hu, did you teach her those moves?" Ling Huchong turned his head around and saw that it was Qiang Boguang who asked him. He shook his head. Qiang Boguang smiled slightly and said, "That day on top of Huashan when I fought with you, I remember you used that crane coming whatever, but you weren't familiar with the move at the time." Ling Huchong was at a loss, as if he didn't hear what Qiang Boguang said. As soon as Yue Lingshan started her attack, he already realized she was using the Taishan school sword arts engraved on the wall at the cave behind the cliff of contemplation. So looks like they found the cave that Ling Huchong found. That's how Yue Lingshan knows the sword moves of the Taishan school. Qiang Guang has a slightly higher voice. Yeah, sorry. As soon, but he had never mentioned to anyone the existence of the cave behind the cliff of contemplation. He also remembered that he had covered the hole to the cave's entrance when he left. So how did Yue Lingshan discover it? His thought continued, "Since I could discover the cave, of course little Martial's sister could also discover it. Moreover, I opened up the entrance by accident. Little Martial's sister could have easily found it too." Inside the cave, he had seen the unique skills of the Five Mountains sword arts, as well as the Devil Sex's elders' engraving of the methods to break those sword arts. Although he was familiar with those moves engraved on the wall, he didn't know any of their names. The last three moves used by Yue Lingshan resembled the passing clouds and flowing water, indicating that she knew the movements very well. She managed to injure two masters of the Taishan school using these three moves, and she unleashed the moves incisively. Ling Huchong inwardly praised her for this. When he heard Yu Qingzi say 3 happiness, he remembered the time he went with Master to Mount Taishan. After they had passed the water sign cave, they encountered a long and steep mountain road, which was named 3 happiness. The meaning behind these words was that the length of the slope was 3 li, and after passing the road, you would be very happy to have done so. He never thought that sword move was actually inspired by the slope. A thin old man slowly stepped out and said, "Mr. Yue has grasped the essence of the sword arts from each of the 5 mountain sword schools. This has never happened in Wulin before. I want to study my school's sword art and see how much I actually understand. I'd like to consult Mr. Yue today." From the shining huqin held in his left hand, he drew out a really thin, short sword with his right hand. He was Hangshan School's headmaster, Mr. Mo Da. Yue Lingshan bowed and said, "Martial Uncle Mo, please show mercy. I've only just casually learned a few moves of the Hangshan School's sword art. Martial Uncle Mo, please give me some advice." Mr. Moda had said, "I'd like to consult Mr. Yue today." He actually wanted to fight against Yue Buchun, but Yue Lingshan unexpectedly replied to him and clearly said that she was going to use Hangshan School sword art. Mr. Moda had a prestigious reputation in Jianghu. The crowd heard Zuo Langchan say that the great Songyan palm Fei Bin died under Mr. Moda's sword, so they all thought, Yue Lingshan used Taishan School sword art to injure 2 masters of the Taishan School. Could she also use the Hangshan School sword art to match him? Mr. Moda smiled. Very good, very good. Great, great. If I'm not Martial Uncle's match, then my father will fight. Mr. Moda said repeatedly, You're my match, you're my match. The short sword was slowly pointed out. It suddenly trembled and emitted a humming sound. From the humming noise, 2 thrusts suddenly shot out. Yue Lingshan lifted her sword to block, but Mr. Moda's short sword was like a ghost as it suddenly went around behind Yue Lingshan's body. Yue Lingshan hastily turned around. Then she heard 2 humming sounds beside her ears and saw a clump of hair floating past her. It was her own hair, which had been cut off by Mr. Moda. She was anxious and quickly thought, He's showing mercy. Otherwise, his sword could have killed me just then. Since he's not going to harm me, I can just attack him. She didn't care about her opponent's sword path anymore. With 2 thrusts, she aimed at Mr. Moda's lower abdomen and forehead. Mr. Moda was slightly startled and thought, These 2 moves are Quan Ming Fu Rong and Crane Soaring to Zige. These are my Hangshan School's unique skills. How did she learn them? Yo, hey, Diva with a voice. Thank you so much for becoming a patron. Or, wait, not a patron. A member. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Okay, so it looks like Mr. Moda is going easy on her, but then she's exploiting that fact and she's just attacking him without defending, right? Mount Hangshan had 72 peaks, and the 5 highest peaks were Furong, Zige, Shilin, Tianzhu, and Zhurong. Among the Hangshan schools' sword art, there were 5 groups of sword arts named after each of those highest peaks. Mr. Moda saw that the moves Yue Lingshan used just then was the one move containing one group move, which meant this one move contained the essences of dozens of sword arts from that group. Furong sword art contains 36 moves, and Zige sword art contained 44 moves, and each of these 2 sword groups contained the essences of dozens of moves. When they were simplified and harmoniously combined into one move, that one move would be very powerful and would be offensive and defensive at the same time. Quan Ming Furong and Crane Soaring to Zige were 2 of these combined moves, and they both made up part of the Hangshan School's top sword arts, which were called the Hangshan's 5 divine swords. The crowd just heard the continuous sound of swords clashing, and they didn't know who was actually attacking or defending. They also didn't know how many moves these 2 people had executed in that short time. Mr. Moda had planned everything before making his move on this mountaintop. He had also thought of a way to counter this leadership challenge sword fight. He didn't have the slightest thought of actually becoming the headmaster of the 5 Mountains School, and he knew even better that he was no match for Zuo Langchan or Ling Huchong. But he was the headmaster of the Hangshan School, so he couldn't just bow his head and stand idly by during the leadership challenge sword fight. He was angry at Yu Qingzi for helping an evil person do evil and causing the death of priest Tianmen. So his original plan was to have it out with that priest. But who would have thought that all 3 Z of Taishan was injured beforehand, and the only remaining opponent who was his match was Yue Buchun. When he was at Shaolin Temple, he had already seen Yue Buchun's martial arts clearly, and he was sure that he wouldn't lose to Yue Buchun, but the one who came up to fight was unexpectedly his daughter. He was already startled that Yue Lingshan was able to use the Hangshan School sword art, but he was now confounded as well as afraid to see that Yue Lingshan was able to use one of the Hangshan School's highest sword arts, the one move containing one group. The year Mr. Moda's martial ancestors and martial uncle ancestors went to Mount Huashan to fight the Devil Sect's 10 leaders, or 10 elders, many of them were killed. At that time, Mr. Moda's master was still young, and he had learnt all of these 5 groups of sword art, such as the Furong and the Zige. but he only knew the general idea of the one move containing one group move, such as the Kwanming Furong move and the crane soaring to the Zigu move, which were part of the Hung blah 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 blah. Oh my god. Stop dropping names. Is it lagging? Oh no. Not my fault. Not my fault. Tell me if it gets too bad. Maybe we'll need to restart it. But I don't think it's on my end. Naturally, Mr. Moda didn't get detailed instructions of these moves from his master, but how could this young lady from another school suddenly use these precious sword moves? Dun, 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 dun. Oh, is it lagging? Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Why is it lagging? Well, if we need to restart it, then I think we'll have to restart it. Shoot. This sucks. It's getting to the good part, too. Do I know Candace? What the hell is Candace? Huh? I don't understand. Well, let me know if you need me to restart the stream. If you do, I can do that. Is on YouTube. Everything was fine until 5 minutes ago. The audio is perfect. Well, if the audio is perfect, that's all you need, right? Nothing's happening. Like, yeah, it must be on YouTube side. All right. Well, if the audio is okay, then that's fine, right? I'll just keep on reading. If it gets too bad, then let me know. Then I can just restart. All right. Moving on. Although Yue Lingshan used those two moves, the idea behind the moves eluded her understanding. Otherwise, Mr. Moda would have lost by the second move, excited as he was in seeing these moves. After he easily blocked the two moves, he saw Yue... Okay, they're using the word move a lot. After he easily blocked the two moves, he saw Yue Lingshan's longsword dazzlingly executing the move Shilin Shu Sheng, followed by the move Tianzu Cloud. The principle of the Tianzu sword art was taken from the changes in the cloud, and it relied heavily on its strange variations. Its movements were very random and very hard to predict. When Mr. Moda saw Yue Lingshan use the move Tianzu Cloud, he quickly made his decision. Instead of blocking the attack, he just walked past it. This so-called not blocking and walking past was actually only good to hear. In reality, he was running away from the fight because he couldn't defeat the move. However, because the changes in his sword art were complicated, even at the moment he was running away, his short sword thrust to the east and slashed to the west and dazzled everyone there. Thus, no one knew he was actually just planning to run far away. He knew among the Hongshans' 5 divine swords, besides the Chan Ming Fu Rong Crane. The most formidable move was called the Wild Goose returning to Zhurong. Among Hongshans' 5 highest peaks, Zhurong was the highest one. This Wild Goose returning to Zhurong move was also the most profound among the Hongshans' 5 divine swords. When Mr. Moda's master talked about this move, his descriptions were quite vague because he didn't understand the move clearly himself. If Yue Lingshan were to use it, even if he didn't lose his life, it still would shame him. His heart was worried, and he anxiously dodged and slashed out his short sword. Even though she's learned these wonderful moves, it seems she can only use them stupidly and doesn't seem to be able to respond to an attack automatically using these moves. Unavoidable, but I have to flirt with danger to fight her with all my strength. Otherwise, Moda won't have a face to show myself in Jianghu anymore. He saw Yue Lingshan moving hesitantly and knew that she was undecided about what to do, whether to give chase or not. Mr. Moda gloomily called out, "What a shame! Youngsters have no experience at all." Using the move Tianju Cloud, Yue Lingshan forced Mr. Moda to turn around and run. Although he covered up this cleverly, and it didn't seem like he had lost, the masters around there had already seen his embarrassment in running away. If Yue Lingshan had stood still, taken her sword back, and cupped her fist, saying, "Martial Uncle Mo, thanks for giving way. I offended you," then the winner and loser would have been decided. With the position Mr. Moda had, how could he, after losing, still turn around and fight again with someone a generation lower than him? But Yue Lingshan unexpectedly hesitated and actually gave Mr. Moda such a good opportunity. As Yue Lingshan started to smile, showing her dimples as her cherry-lipped mouth opened slightly like she was about to say something, Mr. Moda's short sword hummed and rushed towards her. This fast attack was the culmination of Mr. Moda's lifetime of practice. The sword was emitting the sound of a huqin. Its light flickered everywhere, and in a flash, the sword and its lights encircled Yue Lingshan. Yue Lingshan called out in alarm and retreated a few steps. How could Mr. Moda give her time to use that move, Wild Goose returning to Zhurong? The short sword in his hand was getting faster and faster, executing the set magical 13 phantom stances of Hongshan Mist, which was ever-changing like the clouds and mist. The spectators couldn't help feeling dizzy from looking at it. If it weren't for the fact that the crowd felt that Mr. Moda was bullying the young, a man bullying a woman, they would have applauded a long time ago. After Yue Lingshan used such moves like Chan Ming Fu Rong, Ling Huchang had no more doubt she had used the sword arts from the engravings on the cave wall at the back of the Cliff of Contemplation. He pondered, why did little Martial's sister go up the Cliff of Contemplation? Master and Master Wife love her dearly. They would never have punished her to stay on that wild and dangerous cliff to meditate. No matter what kind of mistake she may have made, Master and Master Wife would only reprimand her. The Cliff of Contemplation and the living quarters on Huashan Peak aren't close to each other. The road between them is also very dangerous. Even if it were not my little martial sister, but one of the female disciples, they wouldn't send her to live alone up there. Could it be that it was martial brother Lin who was punished to meditate on that cliff, and little Martial's sister went up there every day to deliver him his meals, just like she did when she was attending to me back then? As he thought of this, he couldn't help his chest feeling heated. He again thought, Martial brother Lin is a quiet person, and he also follows the rules and customs strictly, as close as one could get to be a little gentleman's sword. That was the reason why Master, Wife, and little Martial's sister liked him. How could he have erred to deserve punishment on that cliff top? He can't. He couldn't have. He definitely not. Then he thought, could it be little Marshall's sister? Little Marshall's sister. Suddenly he remembered something buried deep in his heart. But this memory was buried too deep. As soon as he recalled it, he immediately forgot about it again. He was stupefied for a moment. What did he remember? He couldn't recall it clearly. Just at that moment, he heard Yue Lingshan cry out in alarm. Her longsword flew out from her hand. Her left foot slipped, and she was now looking up from the ground. Mr. Moda extended his short sword and pointed it at her left shoulder. He smilingly said, "Please rise. There's no need to panic." Suddenly, a pie sound was heard, and the short sword on Mr. Modaz's hand was broken. Yue Lingshan had grabbed a couple of rocks from the ground and smashed one rock towards Mr. Modaz's sword with her left hand. The short sword was very thin, and it immediately broke into two as soon as it was hit. Yue Lingshan followed this by tossing the other rock on her right hand to the left side. Mr. Moda was startled when his weapon broke. Now he saw her tossing a piece of rock to her left side, but there was no one there. It was really strange, and he couldn't understand what her intention was. As soon as the rock hit the ground, it rebounded and hit Mr. Moda on the right side of his chest. With a crack, a few of his ribs were broken and blood spouted out. This unpredictable movement by Yue Lingshan was wonderfully fast. Each move was done cleanly and with agility. Everyone was stupefied. They saw clearly that after Mr. Moda had taken the initiative, he stopped and said, "Please rise, there's no need to panic." Those words were the proper words spoken after a senior had defeated a junior. But Yue Lingshan's picking up the two stones and the two moves that followed were actually fast as lightning and entirely unpredictable. But Ling Huchong understood. Those two moves used by Yue Lingshan were the moves made by the Devil Sex's 10 elders to break the Hangshan School's unique skills. But the engraving on the cave wall actually showed the use of a pair of copper hammers. Yue Lingshan used the two stones in lieu of the copper hammers. If she had wanted to use the stones while they were fighting, it was impossible for her to do so. But once she had acquired the stones, to toss one of them out and for it to fly back, as long as she had practiced the move, the stones and copper hammers can be treated the same. Okay, well that's sad. Okay, because I like Mr. Moda, but he was defeated. Okay, well he actually defeated her, but then he stopped and he's like, "Okay, please rise. There's no need to panic." But then she used the counter move from the cave wall, right, to defeat his own move. Flying over, Yue Buchun entered the battlefield and slapped Yue Lingshan on the cheek. He shouted, "Marshal Uncle Moda has clearly let you off. How dare you be rude to him?" He then stooped down to help Mr. Moda up and said, "Brother Mo, my daughter doesn't know what's good or bad. I'm really sorry. Please forgive her." Mr. Moda smiled bitterly and said, "The female tiger of your school really is out of the ordinary." After he said these words, he again spouted blood from his mouth. 2 disciples from the Hangshan school came out to support him back to the group. Lost, you hate Yue Lingshan? You think she was being a little bit bratty? She kind of cheated. Yue Buchun stared angrily at his daughter for a while before stepping back to the side. Ling Huchong saw Yue Lingshan's left cheek was swollen and 5 fingerprints were left on her cheeks. Well, he didn't have to hit her that hard. It was obvious her father didn't hit her lightly. Tears were flowing from Yue Lingshan's eyes, but her mouth was slightly turned down and her expression was steely. Ling Huchong remembered in the past, when she and I were together at Huashan, when she was naughty and got scolded by master and master wife, she would feel wronged and she would look pitiful and cute. At that time, I would do anything to cheer her up. Little Marshall's sister is most happy when she won a sword fight against me. I only have to do the same thing and appear as if I negligently given her an opportunity and not let her see that I deliberately let her. He thought till here when his previously elusive memory resurfaced, and he suddenly thought clearly. Why would she be at the cliff of contemplation? It's most likely that when she got married, she thought of the deep feelings we used to have, so she went up there all by herself to think of the old days. I've already sealed up the entrance to the back cave with rocks. It's not easy to find if you hadn't stayed up there for long. In that case, she must have stayed up there not just for a short time, but probably went up there more than once. He turned his head to look at Lin Pingzhi and thought, Marshall brother Lin and her and she just got married, so they should be happy and ecstatic. But how come his expression is melancholic? Little Marshall's sister was just slapped by her father, but he didn't go and comfort her, but acts like it has nothing to do with him. That's very unreasonable. He thought Yue Lingshan went up the cliff of contemplation in order to chase after the feelings from the past. But it was only a one-sided guess by him, and in his mind's eyes, he imagined how Yue Lingshan cried her eyes out on the cliff, how she regretted marrying Lin Pingzhi, and how she grieved incessantly for disappointing his deep feelings for her. Okay, he might be just fantasizing at this moment. He's reading a lot into it. So he's saying, like, he thinks that she regretted marrying Lin Pingzhi, and now she's sad that she left him, right? And that's why she went up the cliff, and how she found the cave in the back wall. He lifted his head and saw Yue Lingshan stooping down to pick her sword up. Yeah, and also what's weird is that Lin Pingzhi, her husband, didn't come and comfort her after she was slapped by her dad. Which, if you're a good husband, that's what you would do. He lifted his head and saw Yue Lingshan stooping down to pick up her sword, while her tears dropped onto the grass below. A blade of grass bowed down under a bead of tear. Ling Hucheng suddenly felt impulsive. I must make her smile. In his eyes, this Songshan mountaintop had suddenly become the Jade Maiden Peak at Huashan, and the thousands of people there had turned into trees. In his heart, there was only lovesickness, and his most loved person who had cried after being hit by her father. For his whole life, he had cheered her countless of times, so how could he just ignore her at this time? He strode out and said, Little Marshall, little... He immediately remembered that to cheer her up, he had to fight for real. With his heart drumming, he said, You've defeated the headmasters of Taishan and Hangshan. Your sword art isn't a small matter. My Hangshan school isn't convinced you can use Hangshan school sword art. Why don't you fight me? Oh no, Nikki, you said never liked her and then you made her cry. That's not cool. Yue Lingshan slowly turned around, but she didn't lift her head, and it seemed she was thinking of something. After a while, she slowly lifted her head, and all of a sudden her whole face was blushing. Ling Hucheng said, Although Mr. Yue's skill is high, I'm not convinced he's proficient in each of the 5 schools' sword arts. Yue Lingshan lifted her head and said, You're originally not from Hangshan School. Today, you're the headmaster of Hangshan. Are you proficient in Hangshan School sword art now? Her face was still stained with tears. Ling Huchang heard her words were soft and were quite friendly. He was delighted beyond measure. He quietly said to himself, I must make it look real and don't let her see that I deliberately let her win. He then said, This word proficient, I wouldn't dare say it, but I've already been at Hangshan for a long time and have practiced Hangshan's sword arts. So we'll both be using Hangshan School sword art to fight each other. Whoever uses any other sword art will lose. What do you think? He had already decided on a plan. His own sword art was much higher compared to her, which was a well-known matter. If he pretended to lose, then other people would definitely see it, and Yue Lingshan wouldn't believe it also. But while fighting, if he accidentally used a move from the Dugu Nine Swords, or the Huashan School's sword art, he would at the same time win, but lose per agreement, and no one would doubt him. Okay, so his plan is to fight and accidentally use another move, a move not from the Hangshan School, and that which would make him lose the fight, right? Because the agreement is that you cannot use any other sword art except for the Hangshan sword art. What's up, Toasty? Thanks for the donation. Really appreciate it. My content is great before bed. Awesome. Yue Lingshan replied, All right, we'll have a fight. She lifted her longsword and drew a half circle before thrusting it at Ling Huchang. Okay, so now they're fighting. What do you guys think is going to happen? This is a big moment. Big moment. Hangshan School's female disciples gasped when they saw her movements. The crowd didn't recognize the move as Hangshan School sword art, but when they heard the admiring gasp, they knew Yue Lingshan's move was really Hangshan School sword art, and that it was out of the ordinary. So she's pretty good too, right? She learned all of the sword arts of all the schools. The move she used was really one of the moves taken from the engravings on the cave wall at the back of the Cliff of Contemplation. Furthermore, it was one of the moves that Ling Huchang had imparted to the Hangshan School disciples. Ling Huchang wielded his sword to block. He knew the Hangshan School sword art had movements which shifted unceasingly in many circles and were very tight. Each movement of the sword art looked soft, but actually contained powerful strength. When fighting an opponent, 9 out of 10 moves were defending, and only one move would take advantage of a flaw to make a surprise attack. He had been together with the Hangshan School disciples for a long time, and he had also personally seen Dingjing Shutai fought a few times against the enemy. Now, when he executed the sword moves, every move was circling with meticulous intention. It was obvious he had already grasped the essence of the Hangshan School's sword art deeply. Great Master Fang Zheng, Priest Chongshu, Beggar Clan's leader, Zhuo Langchan, and many other people who were familiar with Hangshan School sword art knew that Ling Huchang was really not from the Hangshan School, but the Hangshan sword art he used was proper and right. Hey, how come everyone here gets named, but the Beggar Clan leader doesn't get named? He just gets called the Beggar Clan leader. That's not cool. Even the most common style still contained a secret attack which thoroughly fit the Hangshan martial art principle of needle in a cotton. They all inwardly praised him. Nikki, you think he's going to throw the fight? All right, let's see. They all knew the Hangshan School had been led by nuns for the last hundreds of years. For people of the Buddhist faith, mercy is the foundation of everything. In particular, it was not suitable for women to use reckless movements, as they studied martial art primarily to protect themselves. This principle of needle in a cotton was like concealing a needle in a wad of cotton. Oh, really? Provided that other people didn't offend, then the cotton would be soft and wouldn't harm them. But if you use strength to crush it, then the needle inside the cotton would pierce your palm. Whether it would pierce shallowly or deeply doesn't depend on the strength of the steel needle, but depends on the power you apply to crush the cotton. If you crush it lightly, then the injury would be light. If you use a lot of strength, then the injury would be heavy. This kind of martial art principle is based on the retribution principle of Buddhism. You sow your own destiny, and the good and bad come from your own heart. After Ling Hucheng had learned the Dugu Nine Swords, he came to understand the essence of set form martial arts well. He had learned to use sword arts with an emphasis on intention and not on set movements. So when he used the Hangshan sword art at this time, the changes at various paces were quite different from the original form, but the sword intention of the Hangshan swords' sword art was still clearly maintained. Wow, he really wants us to know about these sword arts. Yeah, this chapter is cool because you get to hear about how the sword art of the other schools, like you get to hear all the points, how they're different and how they're special. Even though the masters from other schools knew of the Hangshan sword art, they only knew of the main points and didn't know the finer points and changes in the art. So when they saw the sword intention displayed by Ling Hucheng, they all thought, this youngster didn't get lucky in becoming the Hangshan school's headmaster. He's actually the true heir appointed by Ding Xian and Ding Jing Shitai. Only Hangshan school disciples like Yihe and Yiqing were able to see that the sword forms he used were different from the ones taught by their masters. Even though the forms were different, they realized that the meaning behind these sword moves were deeper than the original sword art. Ling Hucheng and Yue Lingshan were both using Hangshan school sword arts, engraved inside the cave at the Cliff of Contemplation. But Ling Hucheng's sword art was originally much higher compared to Yue Lingshan. Added to that, he also had been together with the Hangshan school disciples for many days, so he knew the scope of the Hangshan school sword arts better than Yue Lingshan. As the two of them fought, if it weren't for Ling Hucheng deliberately giving way, he would have won in just a few moves. After fighting for more than 30 moves, Yue Lingshan had exhausted the moves she learned from the cave wall and was forced to repeat them. It was good that this set of sword art was very complicated and looked really pleasant with its circling movements. There was not much distinction evident between each move. From the first one to the 36th move, they looked just like one big move. Besides Ling Hucheng, who had also learned this sword art, no one else could tell that she was repeating moves. The moves Yue Lingshan used were very tight, and Ling Hucheng followed the proper method to counter each one of them. The two of them had learned the same identical sword moves, which contained the essence of the Hangshan school's sword art. Their sword plays were very impressive, and the movements were extremely pleasing to the eye. The spectators were watching happily and continuously applauded. All right. Give me 5 minutes. I'll be right back. All right. 5-minute break. I'm back. Back. All right. Continuing on. Continuing the fight. I like how they explain the Hangshan school sword art. It's like a needle in a cotton ball, I guess. Right? So if you squeeze it really hard, then you get hurt a lot. If you only squeeze it a little bit, you get hurt only a little bit. And if you don't attack it, then you don't get hurt. Right? Yeah. It's kind of like using the opponent's force against them. Yeah. I think that's the idea behind Aikido, right? With Aikido, you use the opponent's force against them. Yeah. I'm very good at martial arts. I'm an expert in martial arts. All right. Someone said, Ling Huchang is the headmaster of the Hangshan school. It's not unusual the sword art he's using is so brilliant, but this Miss Yue is clearly a disciple of the Huashan school. How can she also use the Hangshan sword art? Someone else said, Ling Huchang is originally Mr. Yue's disciple too, and he was also the eldest disciple. Otherwise, how could he be this proficient in this sword art? If Mr. Yue didn't personally pass it down, how can the two of them fight so harmoniously? So they think Yue Buchun taught those two the sword art of the other schools. There was also another one who said, Mr. Yue is proficient in Huashan, Taishan, Hongshan, and Hangshan schools' sword arts. It seems he must also know the Songshan sword art as well. There's no one who fits this position of Five Mountain School headmaster better than him. Another person said, That's not necessarily true. Songshan's headmaster Zhuo's sword art is much higher than Mr. Yue. In the principle of martial art is quality over quantity. Even if you know how to use all the martial arts in this world, what's the use? You'll only be a three-legged cat. Headmaster Zhuo's single Songshan sword art can defeat Mr. Yue's sword arts from all 5 schools. So apparently, three-legged cat means a person who can do many things but specializes in nothing. The first person from before said, How do you know? Shamefully blowing your own trumpet. The second person angrily said, Blowing my own trumpet? Let's bet 50 taels if you got guts. The first person replied, What guts? No guts. What guts? No guts. Let's bet over 100 taels. Wait, I messed that up. What guts? No guts. Let's bet 100 taels. Trade the silvers first. The loser will be under the Hangshan school. The second person answered, All right, 100 taels. What's under the Hangshan school? The first person said, The loser becomes a nun. And the second person spat. At this time, Yue Lingshan's moves became even faster. Ling Huchang saw her looking elegant and graceful, remembering the old days when they practiced sword together at Mount Huashan. He gradually became absent-minded. When he saw her thrusting with her sword, he just followed it with a move of his own, not realizing that this move wasn't actually the Hangshan school sword art. Yue Lingshan was startled and whispered, Plum flower like a bean. She followed it with a slash at Ling Huchang's forehead. Ling Huchang was also stupefied and whispered, Willow leaf like an eyebrow. Even though the two of them were using Hangshan school sword arts, they didn't know the names for them, but these two moves they just exchanged weren't the Hangshan school sword arts. These were actually from the sword art they created when they were practicing together at Huashan, the Chongling sword art. The Chong was from Ling Huchang's name, and the Ling was from Yue Lingshan's name. This was the sword art they had playfully created together. Oh, isn't that cute? They're using the martial arts that they created when they were a kid. When they were children. Ling Huchang was a far more innocent time. Ling Huchang was far more intelligent than his martial sister. In whatever he did, regardless of what it was, he would do it happily, without a care for any rules, and come up with new and creative ideas. Even though this group of sword art was created by the two of them, almost all of them were Ling Huchang's ideas. At that time, their martial arts were still quite shallow, that there was nothing formidable about these sword moves, but the two of them had often practiced these set of sword arts at a secluded place and were very familiar with them. When Ling Huchang accidentally used the move Plum Flower like a bean, Yue Lingshan followed with the move Willow Leaf like an eyebrow. The two of them had used these moves without any deep meaning originally, but now, all of a sudden, both of their faces turned red. Ling Huchang didn't slow down as he followed with the move See First in the Fog. Yue Lingshan followed with the move First Time After the Rain. The two of them had practiced this set of sword art for so many times during their time at Huashan, but they were afraid that master and master wife would scold them if they found out, so they didn't tell anyone about it. But at this time, they couldn't control themselves as they used these moves in front of all the realms' heroes. In a short moment, they had traded around 10 moves. Not only Ling Hucheng felt he had returned to the former scenery at Huashan when they were practicing sword together, even Yue Lingshan gradually forgot that she was already married and that she was in front of thousands of Jianghu people to fight for her father's fame. In her eyes, only her carefree big martial brother was there, practicing the sword art that they had created. Oh no, Ying Ying and Little Lin are watching those two flirting in martial arts. I didn't know you can do that. I guess you can flirt with anything. Ling Hucheng saw the expression on her face becoming gentler and gentler, and there was a glint of happiness in her eyes. It was obvious she had forgotten the incident of her father slapping her before. He thought, when I saw her earlier today, she looked melancholy and unhappy, but she's finally feeling happy now. If only this Chongling sword art has thousands of moves and would never finish in a lifetime. Ever since the time he heard Yue Lingshan humming a Fujian's folk song at the Cliff of Contemplation, this was the first time his little martial sister treated him like in the past. His happiness was unbounded. After another 20 moves, Yue Lingshan's long sword slashed at his left leg, and Ling Hucheng lifted his left leg to kick at her sword. Yue Lingshan lowered her sword edge to chop at his leg. Ling Hucheng's longsword hurriedly attacked her right waist, and Yue Lingshan circled her sword. The two swords met with a resounding clang, and the points of both swords vibrated. Both of them immediately thrust forward at the same time, towards each other's throat. Their speed was unmatched. Looking at both swords thrusting forward at such speed, it seemed like no one would be able to go up to save them, and they would both meet in common ruin. The crowd called out in surprise, but the crowd heard a sudden ringing sound and saw that the points of both swords pushed against each other in mid-air, generating sparks. Generating sparks, all right. Generating sparks, and then bent together to make an arch. Both of them sent their palms forward, clashed palms, and floated down, separating from each other. So I think that's supposed to be elegant, like they floated down. No one would have guessed this outcome, that the points of these swords could unexpectedly and opportunely meet in midair like this. It was very hard for two sword points to come together like this, just for once, even after thousands of sword fights. But these two people had unexpectedly done this once in a lifetime deed. Nobody around there had ever seen such a unique incident of two sword points meeting in the middle of the air in the thousands of sword fights they had seen. But Ling Hucheng and Yue Lingshan had actually practiced thousands of times just to do this, and they had accomplished what they had set out to do some time ago. This move must be done by the two of them simultaneously. When they started their moves, the positioning and power must be completely right. When both sword points met with enough speed behind them, they would bend and make an arch. This sword art was not useful in actually winning a fight against an opponent, but to Ling Hucheng and Yue Lingshan, this was a very amusing and interesting thing to do. It was very difficult. After they had finished practicing this sword move, they took it a step further and practiced till the sword points would hit with sparks flying around. When they had finished practicing this move on Huashan, Yue Lingshan asked what name they should call this move by. Ling Hucheng answered, "What do you think we should call it?" Yue Lingshan laughingly answered, "The two swords meeting together simply can't take anyone's life. How about we call it Common Ruin?" Ling Hucheng said, "Common Ruin. It sounded like you and I have absolutely irreconcilable enmity between us. How about we call it You Die, I Live?" Yue Lingshan pouted and said, "Why I die, you live? You die, I live is the correct one." Ling Hucheng said, "I did say you die, I live. This you and I, it's not clear. No one dies in this move, so we should call it Live Together, Die Together." Ling Hucheng clapped and said it was a good name. Yue Lingshan thought this name of live together, die together was too intimate, so she dropped her sword and ran. The crowd saw the two of them were on the verge of death before escaping from an extremely dangerous situation. Cold sweat was running down their hands, and they had even forgotten to cheer. That day in the Shaolin Temple, when Yue Buchun and Ling Hucheng fought, even though Yue Buchun used the moves from Chongling's sword art to urge him to return to the Huashan school, he didn't use this move. Though Yue Buchun secretly peeped into their practice and found out the moves from the Chongling sword art, he didn't devote his time into practicing this nonsense and useless live together, die together move. That was why when Fang Zhang, Chongshu, Zhuo Langshan, and the others, and the other masters, saw it, they were all greatly surprised. Ying Ying was frightened and felt uneasy after seeing it. Oh no, Ying Ying. She's very jealous at the moment, and she feels very bad. She saw that they were both smiling as they separated and floated down. From their attitudes and postures, it seemed as if they were wrapped in a warm and gentle spring breeze. Yeah. Yeah, so they're fighting, but they're not there, right? They're not there on top of the mountain. Both of them are remembering the past, so it's like they're just practicing sword art in the past. Both of them lifted their swords and fought again. When they created this sword art on Huashan, they were suited to each other and mutually loved each other. For this reason, the sword art they created contained a lot of playful elements and not much killing intention. Now, as they fought, they unwittingly returned to their old scenery. Their swords were slow, their eyebrows were lifted, and gradually their tender feelings from when they were childhood friends bursted forth. This sword fight, it would be better to call it dancing with swords, or better yet, a sword dance. Sword copulation? No. This sword dance, however, was not for entertaining guests, but rather for entertaining oneself. Suddenly, from among the crowd, she heard someone utter a "hey," and sneered coldly. Yue Lingshan was startled when she realized it was her husband's voice. She thought, "It's not right for me to fight big martial brother like this." She circled her sword, slashed upwards, and pierced it forward powerfully. This sword movement looked beautiful, as it was the stance out of the Huashan School's 19 stances of the Jade Maiden Sword. Ling Hucheng had also heard Lin Pingzhi's cold sneer and saw how Yue Lingshan promptly changed her move afterwards. The coming attack wasn't soft anymore and didn't look anything like the Chongling sword art, which was full of tangled up meanings. His heart felt sour, and all of a sudden, all kinds of past events bubbled up in his mind. A lot of cringe. A lot of cringe. It's the cringe sword art. Wait. He remembered the days when he was being punished by Master on the cliff of contemplation to meditate. At that time, little Marshall's sister came every day to deliver him his meals. One day it snowed heavily, and the two of them actually spent a night together inside the cave. He also thought of the time when little Marshall's sister got sick, and the two of them did not meet for many days. The pain of love sickness blossomed in him then. But at that time, without knowing how, Lin Pingzhi unexpectedly gained her favor. From then on, the two of them started to misunderstand each other as days went by. He also thought of the day after little Marshall's sister had learned the 19 stances of the Jade Maiden Sword from Master Wife. She came to the cliff to test the moves against him, but he was feeling bitter at that time, and he unexpectedly didn't let... He thought of these things in just the blink of an eye. At this moment, Yue Lingshan's longsword had almost arrived at his chest. As Ling Hucheng's mind was in confusion, he flicked out with a finger in his left hand. Ring! He flicked at her longsword, resulting in Yue Lingshan being unable to hold on to the sword. It flew out of her hand and shot up into the sky. After Ling Hucheng had flicked out the sword, he gloomily called out, "Oops!" He saw Yue Lingshan's expression had turned bitter, looking like she wanted to smile, yet unable to smile. That day on the Cliff of Contemplation, Ling Hucheng had also used a similar move to flick her treasured sword, the Sword of the Green Pool, down the bottomless abyss of a valley. From this incident, a wall had grown between the two of them. He never expected that today he would actually repeat what he did before. For these last few days, on calm nights, he had sometimes pondered on why he flicked away Yue Lingshan's longsword and realized it was because he was jealous of Lin Pingzhi. When his feelings were bubbling forth inside him, it was hard for him to control himself. So he himself was to be blamed. How could he have known that his old jealousy would come out again? And when he saw how Yue Lingshan's attitude changed on hearing Lin Pingzhi's voice. That day on the Cliff of Contemplation, with a flick, he was already able to shake the longsword off Yue Lingshan's hand. This time, with his current internal energy, he cannot say how far the sword would actually go, as it soared high into the sky, and actually didn't come down for quite a little while. His thought turned quickly. I actually wanted to lose to little Marshall's sister and to make her happy, but I flicked her longsword away now, and that's really going to make her lose some face in front of all these heroes. How could I use such a despicable method to repay for little Marshall's sister's friendship? He took a glance and saw that the longsword was now in midair and coming down. He immediately shifted his body and called out, "Good Hangshan sword art!" He looked as if he had exhausted his energy. In fact, he was positioning his body on the point where the sword was coming to. With a "puh" sound, the longsword entered the back of his left shoulder. Ling Hucheng threw himself forward and nailed his longsword on the ground. This accident happened so fast that the crowd called out and was then stunned into silence. Yue Lingshan was alarmed as she said, "You, big martial brother." She saw a bearded man rush up with his longsword up. The injury on the back of Ling Hucheng's shoulder was spouting blood, and more than 10 disciples from the Hangshan school encircled him. Some of them struggled to take their medicines out to apply it on him. Yue Lingshan didn't know whether he would live or die, so she went up to see. With a flash, 2 swords barred her path. A female nun shouted, "Cruel woman!" Yue Lingshan was startled and retreated a few steps. She didn't know what to do. Yue Buchun laughed long and hard, then in a clear voice said, "Shaner, you used the sword arts from Taishan, Hangshan, and Hangshan swords, the Hangshan schools to defeat the 3 headmasters from each respective schools. That's very hard to do." Yue Lingshan dropped her longsword. The crowd saw that Ling Hucheng had flicked her longsword away, but it was Ling Hucheng who was then injured by her sword. Those were the facts. But whether that move was Hangshan's sword art or not, no one could say. When they were fighting using Chongling's sword art, the spectators couldn't understand what they were seeing, but they knew the moves were simple and artless and completely useless. Only the dancing looked good. At the end, it turned into a mishap, and everyone was surprised that it would end up like this. Now, when they heard Yue Buchun praising his daughter that she had used each school's sword art to defeat the 3 headmasters, they thought this move Yue Lingshan used of sword dropping down from the air was indeed Hangshan school sword art. Although some people had doubts because they felt this sword art was very different from the Hangshan sword art, and yet they couldn't tell the origin of it. So it was inconvenient to publicly debate this with Yue Buchun. Yue Lingshan picked up her longsword and saw her sword was covered in blood. Her heart was drumming fiercely, and she thought, how is he? As long as he doesn't die, I'll... Done. That's it. Chapter over. Did you guys like it? This is a pretty big moment in the story. I think the next chapter will be better too. So Yue Lingshan, a little girl, beat the 3 headmasters of the 3 schools. Okay. And because she beat them, the crowd believes that, well, if she can beat them, then her father, Yue Buchun, must be even better than her. So it's like he beat, so it's like Yue Buchun also beat the 3 headmasters, right? He should just propose properly to Ying Ying. Yeah, but he's like flipping back and forth between Ying Ying and Ling Shan, right? We all know who he should be with, but he seems to be confused. So he's flipping back and forth. Yeah, it seems like whoever he's with, he just falls in love with them. So if he's hanging around Ying Ying, then he's in love with Ying Ying. But then now he sees Ling Shan, and he falls in love with Ling Shan again. What's up, Fireside? How you going? Yeah, next chapter is very important. It's a critical chapter. All right. All right, let's drink before we go. All right, cheers. If you think about it, like Ling Huchong is being very irresponsible, right? This is a fight for to be the headmaster of the 5 Mountains School, and he's because of love, because he's lovesick, he's gonna throw the fight to let her win, right? He could very well be the headmaster. He could very well beat everyone and be the headmaster of this school, but he just decided to throw it all away. Not ready for commitment. Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks for coming. Next week is going to be a really critical chapter. So hope to see you next week. Thanks for coming. All right, I love you. Bye.